So the truth is that detachment might be one of the hardest things you will ever do. Like this fact that you have to disconnect from something that you saw a whole life with, a whole future in. And it's not always relationships. Sometimes it's jobs and these things. But the reality is that for a lot of us, we are able to get over these things. We are able to detach. We just haven't been able to compartmentalize the things that we have to do. We don't realize the value that's in us. So you have the ability to do this. And before we talk about any points and all these things that might help, the truth is that you have this ability. It's just you keep telling yourself about how hard it is that you stop yourself from actually doing it. You keep remembering and playing things that you had already envisioned that you don't allow your truth to settle in. So the truth is that you have this ability. You can do this thing. And the first point to all this is realizing that you are more in love with the thought of the person than who the person actually was. Like, it's hard to differentiate those things, right? It's hard to separate that. It's hard to think, oh, well, what's the difference between the person and the thought? Well, the thought was easily manipulated. The thought was something that you were sold. It was something that you sold yourself, that you repeated and that you kept playing, and you created memories that never existed, and you did all these things that you thought that were going to be good. It ended up just being a downfall. It ended up being a heartbreak. You have to come to terms with the fact that there are things that you created in your mind and in your heart that didn't exist in your life. You sold yourself a memory, a story of something that you wanted so badly, so dearly, and now you have to break up with the story of the thing that you created. You have to come to terms with that fact that that thing didn't exist. And I think that's where we struggle so much, because it's the feeling of what could have happened. You've envisioned this. You've created this whole narrative. You created a life. You probably have imaginary kids in your situation. And now those things have to die. They have to leave. And getting over that has to be so heartbreaking and so hard. But you need to realize that you will never let this thing happen. You will never give birth to the reality of what could be, because you've been so attached to the lie of what wasn't. You're so focused on this thing that you sold yourself. And I think that's also one of the hardest parts, that we have to come to terms with the fact that we lied to us. We lied to ourselves. And it might not have been because you wanted to, right? Because of course you desired this thing, but in your mind, in your heart's eye, you said this was going to happen and it didn't. And you have to come to terms with that reality. I need you to understand that it's not your fault. Right? I think that's one of the hardest things that we pick up on, that we allow this to happen. So we think, oh, it must be because of me. Clearly you desired something different. Otherwise you wouldn't be watching a video on how to detach on things, or listening to whatever this is. You have to realize that there was a memory of something that you desired. And now we have to separate ourselves from that memory. Remind ourselves of what's true. Second point is cutting off all relationships. And I think that's hard. There's a whole trend happening right now with the no contact thing. And yes, in principle, it's great. That's basically what you should be doing, right? Not connecting back to the thing that was harming you, was hurting you. But it's hard. It's hard to sit there and say, I'm not going to reach out to something, or I'm not going to do something that has become a habitual part of my life, that I've become so accustomed and so used to. You have to realize that the more you put yourself closer to this thing, the more difficult it becomes to pull away. It's like quicksand, right? If you step into it, which actually isn't really a real problem in the real world, but the notion of it, the theory behind it, quicksand, you keep putting yourself into something that's drowning you. And the little bit you might have wiggled out, if you go in deeper, it's just going to pull you in further. You have to start creating boundaries. You have to cut these things out of your life. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's phases of simplicity. So it starts off really difficult, but the more effort you give, the easier it becomes. Each time you need to remind yourself of what's happened. You need to remind yourself of what you haven't gotten. You need to remind yourself of the fact that you are still begging for the bare minimum in a situation where you should be loved and adored. Do you really deserve to beg? Like, you need to remind yourself, is this okay? Do I need to beg somebody to just give me attention, to love me minimally? The truth is that you should never have to beg. You should never have to feel like you have to degrade who you are simply to be accepted in the room. It's not worth being in those things. Become obsessed with yourself. And I need, this is the big one, because this is the catalyst, this is the game changer. This is what makes a person go back to the situation they were in, and a person or another person that would flourish, that would grow, that would be something amazing, because they reminded themselves, they became obsessed with their own personal growth. And I think we misunderstand that sometimes. Sometimes people think that becoming obsessed with you means your pride or your ego or these other things. It's actually the opposite. It's being the catalyst is creating something in you that's saying, okay, I need to be so much better because I deserve better, not because I am better than anyone else, but I deserve better for me. And I think that's also a big part of detaching from people, that we have to kill our own ego. We have to realize that we didn't get the thing, we didn't win. And if we can't let our ego die, we can't say, okay, that thing didn't happen, which ironically you did win. You didn't have to put yourself in a place to beg anybody to be okay with you. But you have to let your ego die and become obsessed with growing who you are. This is a betterment of you. It has nothing to do with, again, you being better than anyone else, but it's being the best possible you. Because that next person that's going to come into your life is going to deserve the best possible you. They're going to deserve the person that desires to love fully. They're going to deserve a person like you that wants to love, that wants to pour out, that wants to give. They want someone that is going to be equally as yoked, equally as attached. That's a beautiful Christian word there, right? Equally as yoked, to be connected, to be at the same level as that person. You need to grow. You need to love you the same way you would have loved them. You didn't win in this situation, but you did. That detachment is now birthed in you. And finally, you have to be rooted in your happiness. Like, you have to be so aware of you, of the desires of your heart, of the things that you actually want to achieve and receive, and make that the focus as to why you do everything. Because I think sometimes we get so caught up in trying to make other people happy that we allow ourselves to be miserable. We don't allow the fullness of what we're made to be to flourish in us, because it's so easy to give, and it's actually natural, and it's actually good. Science says this, right? That the happiest people in the world, the most joyful people in the world, are people that give, and that is a natural part of your humanity. When God created you, He made you to give. You are a giver. That is natural to you. However, there comes a point where it's no longer giving, it's almost selling. You are selling off who you are in effort for a person to see the little bit and appreciate it. You need to be rooted in your happiness. You need to learn to give to you, because you deserve you too. That whole fact that we've become so obsessed with other people, we need to learn to be obsessed with ourselves. We need to learn to be giving to ourselves. We need to learn to love ourselves. The reason a lot of people struggle with detachment, why we have attachment issues or detachment issues, it's not so much of wanting something. It's being so afraid of myself, being afraid to be alone, that I want to pour so much into somebody else that they finally give me the little bit. Some of us need to learn to be happy with us. And everything else is beautiful, and it's great, and it adds and it edifies who you are, but it should not identify who you are. You should not change your life, your persona, the person you were made to be, just so somebody else can approve of you. Detachment is hard. It's going to be hard. But you have to decide at some point, what am I fighting for? And is it for me? You don't have to beg. You don't have to plead. You don't have to cry for things that were meant to be in your life. At the end of the day, if you keep going back to those things, they're going to keep taking and taking and taking. You have to learn to give to yourself.